No, I all I'm seeing is that background, so I'm wondering.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Global Accessibility Day 2023. This is our European and Africa, that region of the world session, our EMEA session, as we like to know it. I am here. My name is Ladek. We are going to give a few minutes for people to come into the room. I see there's already 16 or so people in here, and that is fantastic. But welcome, everybody. While you're here, while you're coming into the room, it would be great to know if, and where you are from. So I know that I am sitting in Mexico City, Mexico right now. So it's a little early for me in the morning here. But, our presenter today, the person who is our expert, Michael Vaughn, is not here next to me, which is one of the beauties of the interwebs that I still find, that's the magic for me. Michael, where do we find you sitting?
Right now, I'm on the east coast of the United States in North Carolina.
Fantastic. And it looks like it's a nice, bright, sunny morning there.
It is, yeah. It's beautiful, nice and crisp and cool. Very nice spring day. Can't complain.
Fantastic. Well, so I said I'm going to give a few minutes here for everybody to come into the room to get settled and get ready to talk about both accessibility and artificial intelligence as it applies to the learning space right now. Although it always seems like we find that when we talk about one thing, it applies to other parts of our lives as well. So totally happy with that.
Yeah.
Nice. Adele, great to see you tuning in from Ireland. Very nice to see you. Again, if you're coming into the session right now, I believe, we're live on YouTube right now. Throw in the chat there. It's on the, in my universe, it's on the right-hand side there of the screen. Throw in your name or where you're watching from. We'd love to know what our audience looks like and who's listening in. Michael.
How's it going?
Doing just fine. Nicholas, thanks for also joining us. You're in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us. Since I know you have a slide deck that is robust, and we have quite a bit of material to cover here, let's jump in. As we're going along, folks, make sure that you do. If you have a question along the way, if you have something to an experience to share of yours, if you have a challenge that you'd want to, Michael do or I to address, please throw it in the chat there. We do see them live as we're going along, and part of this is to be interactive. Part of this is to have a conversation, not just a presentation. So without further ado, Michael, why don't you kick us off? Where do you want to get started?
I tried to share some slides behind the scenes, so I think StreamYard just needs to switch source. And awesome, fantastic.
There you go.
Thanks so much.
I am happy to. Well, you're actually controlling the slides, so there you go.
All right, sounds good. And if we run into any technical issues, please just let me know. We can work on fixing that. But welcome everyone to the OpenLMS Global Accessibility Awareness Day session. This is something that we've participated in for several years. It's one of my favorite traditions because accessibility is very important to me, making content accessible for as many learners as possible, ideally all learners, is a really important goal that I love supporting when I work with other folks. So thank you for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be from. Where I am right now, it's relatively early in the morning. I recognize for most of you, it's probably around lunchtime or so. So I appreciate you sharing that time with us. I know it's not always easy to carve out time to talk about topics that are as important as this. So a little bit of background for me. I'm an adoption and education specialist with OpenLMS, so I get to do a lot of training, some outreach with clients. I've been working with instructional technology and educational technology for over a decade and a half at this point, mostly in higher ed, but also in some corporate spaces as well, and recently shifted into corporate training when I joined OpenLMS. I love presenting, I love training, I love talking about different topics that I'm really passionate about. One of them is accessibility, and another one is AI. So I'm really excited that we get to blend those today and talk about how we might be able to use some of these new and emerging AI tools to improve accessibility and make it easier, like lower the barrier for entry for instructors and for content developers and for course builders, so that they are making content accessible by default using some tools that make those processes a lot simpler. And I also have two incredible kids. I always like to mention that. Like, they're really fantastic. They're super cute. Love them to death. In terms of what our goals are for the day, I just want to talk very briefly about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. For those of you who might be joining because you're interested in accessibility, but you didn't necessarily know about this day, I wanted you to have some historical context for what that is and what GAD is as an organization. I want to talk a little bit about what accessibility means and why it's important. I don't think that's going to be a very hard sell for folks who are voluntarily coming to a session about accessibility, but it's always helpful to start with some working definitions and mindsets before we really get into content. I'll do a general introduction to artificial intelligence. This will be a non-technical introduction. So if anyone feels a little overwhelmed and you're like, I don't even know what GPT stands for, don't worry at all. We won't go into anything super technical. It'll just be a top level overview of, functionally speaking, how AI works, and then some ideas and strategies for how we might use AI to make content more accessible for all learners. So that's the general goal today. In terms of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, by the way, this is the most text I had to any of the slides, so don't worry. I just wanted to literally quote them word for word, but you can read more about this at the website. The URL is fantastic. It's just accessibility.day. One of the best URLs I've ever seen in my life. So accessibility.day. And the general idea is that literally everyone deserves a first-rate experience when it comes to engaging with content online. And someone with a disability is going to generally experience those services in a way that is not helpful, that is not accessible. Nearly 100% of website landing pages, this is not an exaggeration, nearly 100% have some level of accessibility issues with them that would make it more difficult for someone with an impairment. Maybe they're using a screen reader. Maybe they're using just a keyboard for navigation instead of a pointing device like a mouse, that would impair their ability to engage with the content successfully. And I think that goes to a really large overarching lesson about accessibility, which is the person's impairment is not necessarily what makes them disabled. Very often it's the environment that they're in. And so if we are not creating environments that are accessible, then we are creating that impairment as the content designers and developers. So I really like to emphasize this. I mean, if we go to, let's say, a publicly open building like a museum, there's going to be a ramp for folks who are using walkers, who are using wheelchairs, so that they can also access the space in a meaningful way. And we don't necessarily translate that to the digital world to make sure that everyone can join. And so this is just a day to raise awareness. This is a day to talk about the issue. I talk about it year round. We work it into all of our trainings because we find accessibility to be a core part of design and development and educational experience. But if you want to know a little bit more about this, please do check out their website. They have some fantastic resources. They have some really interesting information. So it's just accessibility.day, and we're very pleased to be a part of this movement and have been for several years now. With all that in mind, I think it's important to start with a working definition of what accessibility means. Like, what are we talking about when we talk about accessibility, and why is it important? And again, I won't spend too much time on this because I think it's probably an easy sell for a self-selected audience, but it is important to discuss the scope of the issue and why it's so important to spend time taking care of your content so that others can access it equally. So our current estimates are about 16% of people globally live with a disability. That is an incredibly large number, an impossibly large number to fully comprehend. It's 1.3 billion people. To put that in smaller terms, if you meet 6 people, one of them will have some sort of disability or impairment. And I would say, like, if you meet 5 people who don't, you might be the 6th person. For example, I need corrective lenses to see. If I don't have these, I'm not allowed to drive legally in my state. There's actually a little note on my driver's license that says, you know, if I'm pulled over and I'm not wearing my glasses, I could be ticketed. I could lose my license because it's not safe for me to drive without these. That's how bad my vision is. But I want to put 1.3 billion in context because we think we understand what a number that big is, and we don't. We actually, it's very difficult to conceptualize just how big a billion is. So I want you to understand, if we're talking about how long 1300 seconds is, We'll make it really, really small, 1300 instead of 1.3 billion. So 1300 seconds is about, maybe halfway through the session. It's not too long from now, just several minutes from now. 1.3 billion seconds will end on Sunday, July 27th, 2064. That's how big that number is. So 1.3 billion people is an incredibly large number. And we very often overlook our responsibilities when it comes to making our content accessible along the way. I think there's a reason for that I'll discuss here in a little bit, and then talk about how we might use AI to counteract that reason. Now, when we talk about accessibility in general in sessions like this, there are generally some challenges that come along with that. And I am not going to focus on any laws or punishments today. There's plenty of information out there about that. Chat with HR, chat with legal. I'm sure that they will have plenty of information for you about what the consequences of not making content accessible would be. I'm not interested in that because I don't want to talk about punishments. I don't want to talk about requirements and things like that. Instead, what I want to do is talk about how we interact with and experience content, and some ways to break mindsets that we might be stuck in so that we can develop content that's a little bit more open-ended for folks. And one of the mindsets that I love to share at the beginning of accessible sessions or accessibility sessions is just the idea that our personal abilities define our sense of what is normal. And it's pretty common sense that would happen, right? What we see on a regular basis becomes normal to us. So what we can do as regular folks in our mind is regular, right? It is normal. That becomes our understanding of what would be normal when we assess others. But to extend that, that means that it's really easy for us to overlook people who are outside of our zone of normal. So, if you're putting together a food order for a group of folks, like maybe you're having a get together with friends, you might order food that you would like to eat without considering that, oh, wait, Jeremy's a vegetarian, so we should probably have a vegetarian option in there. Just little things like that, and extends over into creating accessible content. So it might be like, I can see, I can hear without any visual impairment, no auditory impairments. Like, so why would I need captions, right? Why would I need descriptions on my images? Because I can see my images. And this is a mindset that unfortunately can cause us to accidentally create problems for others. It's very easy to overlook folks outside of our own personal zone of normal. And I've been using this example for a couple of years now, but there was actually a disability rights advocate who was invited to speak at a future cities conference. In other words, like, if we're building the city of the future, what should we do? What should we include to make it as accessible as possible for everyone? And they didn't think to include a ramp for this advocate who is exclusively living out of a wheelchair, for him to actually go up on stage and present. So if folks are not within our zone of normal, it's very easy for us to overlook them. Not only that, but when we talk about disability and when we talk about impairments, we disproportionately tend to focus on the ones that we can easily observe. And I had a personal experience with this several years ago when my folks came down to visit me. I live in North Carolina. They live up in Ohio, which is where I'm originally from. And so it's about an 7-8 hour drive from there to here. My stepdad is a veteran of the Air Force. He served in the first Gulf War, and he, as a result, has some issues with his legs. His calves, for some reason, the muscles just tighten up. They get rock hard, and it's very, very painful for him. He doesn't always know when those attacks are going to happen, and it makes it difficult for him to walk longer periods of time. But otherwise, he looks like any other stereotypical older dad, khaki cargo shorts, sandals, a t-shirt that's like from a tourist trap destination that he visited with my mom. Like, he looks like any other dad. And we went to the local Walmart to pick up some stuff. He parked in the handicap spot. He put his placard up on the mirror. And as we were getting out, a gentleman started yelling at us for essentially cheating the system, accused us of the tag not being ours, because, quite frankly, my stepdad does not look disabled. Like if you look at him, you would not expect that he would have a mobility impairment. You wouldn't know that he's had multiple surgeries on his calves. And by the way, I know some of you are thinking like an American accosted in a Walmart parking lot, shocking. But it was a very uncomfortable experience, and it was a bit scary. And it was just one of those situations where that person was observing, and what they didn't observe was a disability, even though one existed. And, this is a kind of an extreme example, but we do that a lot to other people because we think a lot about, oh, it's very obvious if someone can't hear very well because maybe they have a cochlear implant or a hearing aid, or maybe they are using sign language to communicate with others. If someone is blind or visually impaired, they might have a support animal, they might have a walking stick. So it's very easy for us to observe that there is an impairment there. If someone's in a wheelchair, very easy to tell that there is a physical impairment there. But there are multiple disabilities and impairments that are completely invisible. In fact, about 93% of all disabilities and impairments are not easily observable to the untrained eye. So if we're talking about things like insomnia, depression, anxiety, even other physical disorders that are not always obvious, like Crohn's disease, right? If we're talking about Crohn's disease, folks with Crohn's need to go to the bathroom very, very quickly when they need to go to the bathroom. So it's not a question of can you hold it? It is an answer of no, I need the restroom right now. And so if you're thinking about workplace environments, someone with Crohn's disease might need either an accommodation or they would really benefit from their employer being flexible about allowing them to work from home when they can use the restroom whenever they need, and in the comfort of their own home. So there are all these impairments that are not easily observable, that are functionally invisible because they are well treated, usually, or because folks choose not to disclose because they don't have to. So how do we pre-design for some of those things? Because when it comes to accessibility, the way I've come to explain it to folks is, accessibility is sort of like traffic laws, in a sense that most of us know what we ought to do, but we don't often do it, right? Because we're supposed to come to a complete stop at stop signs, but a good number of us roll those stops. We're supposed to obey the speed limit, and most of us do not. And most of us are supposed to use blinkers when we change lanes or make a turn, and some of us do not. But in fairness to those BMW drivers, they don't even have a turn signal on their car, is my understanding. So when accessibility is like traffic laws, and we know that we should be obeying them, and doing things, we know what we ought to do, but we don't do it. It's usually because it's easier not to. And that's because sometimes making content accessible is really challenging. If we think about the old school methods of creating a transcript for video, it was so time and labor intensive that most colleges and universities would pay a third party service to transcribe videos, and they would only do it when a learner came forward and said, I need a transcript for the video, like I legally need one to engage with this content, and then that content would be made accessible. So it was a very reactive system, very expensive system, very time consuming system in terms of labor and effort. So I think AI could actually speed that up quite a bit to the point where we can make content accessible as part of our workflows for creating things. Now, when I talk about artificial intelligence, this is a relatively new discussion, even though AI has been around for quite a while. We've been doing work with artificial intelligence / AI since about the 60s or so. So a long, long while, this content has been under development, and it's recently hit a critical mass where more and more consumer level products are using AI, and more consumer level products are available that are fully powered by AI. And I think it would be important to start with a sort of working definition and understanding of how we use AI, what is AI, how does it work? And the most important thing that I want to emphasize is you already use AI, and you have for a while. So your day is already powered by AI. You may not realize this, but it is. If you own a smartphone and you use a biometric scan of some kind to unlock your phone, so a fingerprint scan or a face scan, that is powered by AI. It is rapidly gathering data about your face or your fingerprint, comparing it to what it knows about you, and determining whether or not you are who you say you are. It can even learn your appearance over time. So as your hair grows, or you switch your glasses, or maybe you're wearing sunglasses instead of your regular glasses, it can still identify you correctly with a face scan. You also use AI with your email, whether or not you realize it. So I know some folks are thinking about the autocomplete text when you're typing an email reply to someone, but it goes well beyond that. It's the spam and scam filters as well, because there's no one at Microsoft looking through everyone's Outlook emails, and there's no one at Google looking through all your Gmail emails to be like, oh, this is a scam, this is spam, this is clearly phishing. No, they develop AI powered filters that learn and grow and adapt because it's much more scalable to teach a machine to block spam and scam than it is to have a human do that. Now, you can still incorporate feedback into that system by saying, okay, this one actually made it past the filters. I'll flag it as spam so that the model can improve over time. But AI is already powering something as simple as the email that you check multiple times a day. Even the keyboard on your smartphone. If you have a smartphone, like full touchscreen display, the keyboard is using AI to help you type better. And again, a lot of folks think that I'm talking about the predictive text where it's trying to guess what word you're typing, and there's like a little bar and you can just tap whatever the word is. That's not what I'm talking about in this case, because AI is powering the keyboard to guess down to the letter what you might type next. So if I type the letter A, it might assume that I'm about to type the word an, as, or at. So you can see the keys on the screen. If you can't, this is just a standard keyboard, a standard QWERTY keyboard on a phone. And there is a box around each letter. And that box determines if I press there, that's the key that I press. What's actually happening behind the scenes is there's a second invisible box around each letter. And that box gets larger if your keyboard thinks you're about to type that letter next. So this is actively paying attention to how you're typing and what you type over time so that it can try and predict how to help you best. Because again, there's no tactile feedback. There's no definitive button for the letter E or the letter T or the letter L. So it's trying to guess what letter you might type next, and it's going to make the bounding box around that a little bit larger to make it more likely that when you put your finger anywhere near that button, that's the letter that gets pressed. Another really great example would be, the word color, COLR in the US, because we typically drop the U, but in the UK, color is usually spelled with a U, so COLOUR. And what it might guess is if you're in the UK, if you typically type color with that U, then if you type COLO, it's going to make that box around U much larger because it's assuming that you're probably going to tap a U after that. So we actually already use AI. We're very comfortable using AI because it's blended into the background. In terms of technically speaking, how AI works, AI is basically an agent. We call it an agent. And an agent is an app that helps other apps run. You usually don't run agents on purpose. They usually run as a consequence of you opening another app. For example, I mentioned the concept of your keyboard trying to figure out what letter you're going to type next and making the box around that letter larger. That's an AI agent that is assisting the keyboard app. So it's essentially working behind the scenes. A weather app is another really great example of an app that uses AI agents to power itself. So the weather app on our phone, what we expect is when we open the app, we see the most recent weather conditions for our location, along with maybe the conditions that are forecasted over the next several days. There are multiple agents that support the weather app to help it run more smoothly for you. For example, there's an agent that will remind the weather app every 10 to 15 minutes and say, hey, you need to update your weather information because it's now out of date. Weather changes very quickly, so you need to go get the most recent weather information. So it tells the next agent, which is responsible to go out to National Weather Services and get the most up-to-date information and bring it back to the app. Like, hey, it's time to go get new information and bring it back to the weather app. That agent has to interact with another agent, which tracks your location because the weather in London is different from the weather in Leeds. And so you want the information for your specific location. You want to know the weather for where you are, not someplace else. So it needs the location for where it is, it sends it back, and then that agent can go out and get the most recent information for your location so that when you open the weather app, everything is just there. It just works. And sometimes this happens on demand when you open up the weather app and it refreshes really quickly. That's what has happened. All this has happened behind the scenes very, very rapidly. So AI is essentially an agent. That's the first part of our definition. So it's an agent, which is an app that helps other apps, but it's an agent that demonstrates intelligence. So, in other words, it thinks about a problem in the same way that you or I might. And it's meant to generate conclusions similar to how you or I might. In terms of a process for what AI agents do, typically what happens is we deploy them into an environment. So we put them in a space. And in that space, it makes observations. Based on those observations, it makes decisions. Based on those decisions, it makes actions. It acts on those decisions. And this is sort of like us with a jigsaw puzzle, right? In that case, our environment where we're deployed to is the tabletop and all the puzzle pieces. We observe the puzzle pieces, we decide when two of them fit together, and we act by picking them up and moving them together. And that's essentially what an AI agent does in terms of process. And this is not always like the obvious thing. We use voice assistants as an example, really obvious example of AI where you have a direct interaction with an artificial intelligence that is trying to interpret your speech, understand your request, and give you a reasonable, competent reply. But most of these AI tools are not just voice assistants, not just the front facing things. Very often they're running behind the scenes because they are agents. So you're not always running them on purpose. They just run to support you. And the example that I would give is Siri. A lot of folks look at Siri as a voice assistant, but it's actually a deeply ingrained part of the iOS and macOS ecosystem. So, as an example, it thinks about things in the same way that you or I might. So, since Siri knows your location and it knows your calendar, it might say, Michael is at home right now, but his calendar says he has a meeting across town in 1 hour. So, it would do what I would do. It would check the driving directions, the traffic between here and there to see, is there construction? Is there an accident? Is there going to be a delay in my usual route? Maybe it usually takes me 20 minutes, but now it's going to take me 35 to make the same drive. And then it will alert me and say, actually, you need to leave earlier because I know your location. I know your calendar. I know that there's an accident along the way. You need to leave now instead of later. And I would do the same thing. If I had a meeting across town in an hour, I would check the traffic just to make sure that I'm not going to run into any problems getting from here to there. So that's what AI can do. It typically runs behind the scenes. There is another part of AI that we're not going to touch on today, really, which is machine learning, which basically means you give a model feedback and it improves itself based off of that feedback. And sometimes that feedback comes from human beings, and sometimes it can come from the model itself being trained to make observations about what it sees and experiences and the conclusions that it comes to. So where are we right now in terms of what AI is truly capable of? What is the current power available with AI? And I think one of the best examples of the current power of AI would be ChatGPT. It's a relatively approachable technology as far as AI is concerned, and it's topical. A lot of folks are talking about it at the moment. So if we talk about what ChatGPT actually is, it's an AI chatbot that uses a form of AI called a large language model. And essentially, what a large language model AI does is it looks at incredibly large sets of data, incredibly large sets of words, usually like books, websites, other resources, journal articles, things like that. And it tries to identify associations between words and phrases and sentences within different contexts. So that if I were to talk to a voice assistant that was using a large language model, and that voice assistant thinks it hears me say, I'm looking for a farm of me, it can go, okay, based on what I've learned about word associations and phrase associations in different contexts, these words don't appear together very often at all. But the words that do appear together very frequently that sound kind of similar are, I'm looking for a pharmacy. That's a much more common request. So that's essentially what a large language model is doing, is it's trying to figure out where are the stronger associations between words. And it's presented as a conversational AI, so sort of like a chatbot with some level of personality. In fact, it looks a lot like a chat style interface that you would see in any other app. It looks kind of like Slack, looks a little bit like maybe Microsoft Teams or Discord. So it looks like any other chat app out there, but the difference is you're interacting with an AI instead of talking with a human being. ChatGPT is so powerful that the current model has passed quite a few exams that are typically require quite a bit of training and preparation to pass. So with no prior training, they have passed the bar exam. They could become a lawyer in the United States. They've passed the SAT, 300 points higher. This is an exam that typically high school college students or high school students in the U.S. take as part of their college entry process. They passed with a score that's about 300 points higher than the average US high schooler. They passed the GRE verbal and quantitative. This is an exam that many folks take when they're applying for grad school in the US, and quite a few AP exams. Again, high school students are prompted to take AP exams here if they want college credit. So if they're grade out of 5, if they earn a 4 or a 5, they earn college credit, so they don't have to take that class once they get to college. It's a simple way to save a lot of money, essentially. And it has passed exams from art history to physics 2 and calculus. So it's met a passing threshold for those. It even, and this is my favorite, this is the funniest to me, it passed the sommelier exam. So there's a written exam that comes along with being a certified sommelier. And even though ChatGPT cannot smell, taste, or observe in any meaningful way, shape, or form like a human being can, they have passed the written exam to become a sommelier. So that's fantastic. It's even passed the USMLE, which is the licensing exam, to become a doctor in the United States, to become a licensed doctor. So it has met the passing threshold for some of the tests on the USMLE without any prior training. This is really the important part. It didn't have any prior training or reinforcement. Usually you train an AI model before you have it do something, and it managed to pass this really challenging exam without any prior training, which is pretty incredible. So that's where we are in terms of the current power of AI. It can produce results that are very intelligent, that are very, very strong. But with that come problems and potential. So I want to be pretty even in terms of how I talk about this. Generally speaking, when you talk about applying AI to a problem, you give it a challenge, you give it a data set to work with, and it figures out the best way to solve that challenge. And of that, the more data that you can give it, the better. Data beats algorithm. It really does. We've talked about algorithms forever, it feels like, in technology. Data beats algorithm when it comes to AI. The more data you have, generally speaking, the better your results will be, because AI is very good at analyzing large data sets and drawing conclusions from those. And that can be applied in really interesting and meaningful ways. There's one video that I love to show. It's a bit old at this point, but it's of a live translate feature in the Google Translate app. This was originally part of an app called WordLens that Google purchased, and then they incorporated the technology into Google Translate. So you could actually do this today with the Google Translate mobile app. But essentially what happens is there's a live translate mode where you can point the camera on your phone at printed text, and it will not only translate it, but it will overlay it on top of the thing that your camera is looking at to make it seamlessly look like part of the background. So I don't want you to just notice the translation feature as this plays in the background. And again, apologies if you cannot see this, that's totally okay. Essentially, someone's just holding up a green sign with text in English, and it's being translated into Portuguese live on the screen. And again, what I find so interesting about this is if you are paying attention to the computer, or I'm sorry, the phone screen, it is also changing the background of the object that they are looking at as it translates it. So it's trying to make it look like it's actually part of the scene. It's really, really impressive. So AI can do some really incredible things. It's essentially like modern day magic to me. So the potential is fantastic. There are amazing things you can do with it. And from a practical perspective, where I find AI to be really, really helpful is in saving time, because we can hire more people, we can buy more tools and platforms. We cannot buy time itself. And what AI really excels at is speeding up tasks that typically take a lot of time. So AI is very good at speeding up tasks that typically take a lot of time. You would probably not fault anyone for using an electric driver, like an electric screwdriver, instead of a physical hand screwdriver, because it's faster and it does the same job in less time. I don't know many people who would argue with taking a more efficient route. Now, there are certainly some circumstances, like if you go to IKEA and you get a set, they literally say don't use an electric screwdriver because you might actually break the wood or you might break the screws. So there are certainly times and places where you want to apply the most effective technology. But for the most part, it makes a lot of sense if you're doing work like hanging a window or building a deck or doing some woodworking, something like that, for you to use the electric version of the screwdriver rather than the hand version. So along those lines, I use ChatGPT daily as part of my work. I use it to help me write things. I tried it out of curiosity, but it turns out I actually use it quite a bit because it's so useful for me, and it saves me an incredible amount of time for some tasks that have historically been a little onerous. And essentially, all I had to do was shift my mindset from being a writer to an editor. So I've learned to write prompts for ChatGPT to start producing results, and then I conversationally interact with it like a colleague to produce the results that I want. And that's essentially the relationship that your boss may have with you if you write things for work, where they assign you projects, you write something, they provide feedback from their area of expertise, and then that writing is then published. And so I've used ChatGPT to write an awful lot of stuff, used it to write training outlines, used it for client emails. Especially when I had written an email and I was like, this doesn't quite flow right. Like, how could this be improved? Used it for my LinkedIn and my speaker bio. So when folks introduced me at events and things like that, ChatGPT took my old bio. I told it why I had been up to since I wrote it, and it incorporated all that and made it really nice. It's a great intro. I really love it. I've also used it to write a health insurance appeal. And this is where we start to like lean back towards accessibility. Because if I think about how difficult it is to navigate healthcare systems, especially, I recognize this is the EMEA session, but in the US, healthcare is very challenging to navigate. There's no public option really, unless you are severely disabled or retired. And so everything's private insurance. And that means that the insurance company has tremendous incentive to turn down your claim because it means they make more money, and their stock price goes up. So typically, you might have treatment that your doctor recommends or prescribes or suggests, and the insurance company will say, well, I, a person who's not trained as a doctor, don't think that you need that. So we're not going to cover it. And then you have to submit an appeal. And usually when that happens, you are very angry. And so having a neutral writer like ChatGPT, where you can explain the situation and what you need, having them generate the letter based off of that prompt, very, very helpful. And when I think about folks who are chronically disabled, especially with mobility impairments and things like that, the ability to have assistants, like qualified assistants, writing these appeals letters is a very, very powerful tool to have available. I've even used it for things like the titles and descriptions of past webinars, as an example. But because this technology is so powerful, we do have emerging ethical dilemmas. This potential can be relatively problematic in terms of how we apply AI and what it can do for us. So, in terms of some of those new ethical dilemmas and where we can sometimes miss people and leave them out, um, AI is very much powered off of the data that it has available to it. And we've already seen instances of AI powered applications expressing racial and gender bias in their results due to bias that exists in the data. So if there's bias in the data, there's going to be bias in the results. And I would say, what happens with marginalized groups like those with disabilities, right? If we're talking about AI generating results that unfortunately comes from biased data, if we have bias against marginalized groups like folks with disabilities and impairments, that bias is also going to show up in the results of whatever that AI happens to output. For example, if you use an image generator, so there are AI powered apps that you can give it a prompt and it'll generate an image. If you ask it to generate a picture of like 5 college friends, the likelihood that any of those friends will have an observable impairment of some kind, so that there would be representation in that image, probably pretty low. Probably pretty low. So it's just a really simple example, but that bias does exist in the data. If it's not cleaned ahead of time or accounted for in the results, then that's just going to perpetuate further harm to marginalized groups. There's also the issue of access. I'll use ChatGPT as an example again because they offer a service called ChatGPT Plus. And what that does is it gives you access to the strongest, newest model that they use. It also means that when their servers are overwhelmed by people on the free tier, I still have access to the site. So essentially, if their servers are overwhelmed, they'll tell people on the free tier, I can't help you right now. You're going to have to come back later. But I get a special link where I can still log in and use the service. So you've already seen this is a very powerful technology. It's a huge time saver at work. It offers input and feedback that is incredibly helpful. but now there is an economic barrier to access, and that will only be exacerbated as these tools become more and more mainstream. I say that because, again, I hate to stick with the US as an example in a EMEA session, but yeah, I want you to understand what things are like here. People with severe disabilities who are on disability, who receive disability payments from the US government, are limited in how much they're allowed to make before they lose their benefits, which is really bizarre, because many of these folks do want to work. They want to have some kind of a job. But if they make more than $1,470 a month, they lose their benefits, which is a pathetically low number. If we're being frank, it's a horrifically low number. I don't know who came up with that. I don't know why it hasn't been updated in a decade. But folks with disabilities who are on disability, who receive government services, are not allowed to make that much money. So they almost certainly cannot afford $20 a month for an AI powered service that would give them access to better tools and better equipment and better knowledge, right? So there is going to be, to borrow a Dr. Seuss reference, like a star-bellied Sneetches situation where there are going to be like haves and have-nots when it comes to accessing this technology. And very often the folks who are living with chronic disabilities and impairments and severe disabilities and impairments are going to be the ones who are left behind. So there are really complicated ethics that come along with this. This is a non-exhaustive list of some of the other things that we sometimes talk about, but as you can see, like access is a really big one, bias is another. But despite those challenges, I think that there are some really interesting things that you can use AI for that make it very beneficial when it comes to its application in support of making content more accessible to others. And sometimes that's tools that the folks living with the disabilities and impairments will use to access existing content. Sometimes it's stuff that we can use to make that content more accessible by default. So when we talk about accessibility, it has literally never been easier to start to make content accessible as you're building it. Again, I think sometimes it falls to the wayside, pardon me, because it is so time consuming. But AI can dramatically reduce that workload time. Apologies for all the water this morning. I appreciate your patience as I work through some voice stuff. One of my favorite examples of this is a little known tool called Microsoft Word. And in Word Online, there's this really amazing feature that not a lot of folks seem to know about, where there's, of course, a voice dictation feature. So if you have a mobility impairment, it's difficult for you to type. It's amazing that you would have the ability to, be able to talk to the computer and have it translate your speech into text on the screen. If we think about folks with limited mobility, folks with fibromyalgia as an example, the most common type of impairment that folks have, like globally, is a motor impairment. And usually the most common type of that disability is arthritis. So folks who like get really strong arthritis in their fingers, makes it difficult to type, makes it difficult to use a mouse. So being able to use features like that is really, really important. But very often with our videos, we know we're supposed to include captions. It's usually helpful to include a transcript as well, just to have all of that information available. Sometimes if you're teaching a class and you heard this podcast episode and you want to include that, but the people who made the podcast just didn't make a transcript, so it's not transcribed at all. You just have this audio. How do you do that? In the past, that was a very time-intensive process. There was a little pedal that you would press with your foot to play or pause the video or audio, and then you would just manually type it. And that was essentially how we did it. And now we do have AI to assist. So there's a transcription feature built into Word Online that I absolutely love. Since I'm in a browser, I'm just gonna like switch over to a different tab. So this is not the screenshot. This is the actual same document that I was just looking at. And they have that dictation feature, but buried in this menu is a transcription feature. So you can take audio from your video or audio from it's a podcast or audio recording, upload in here, and it will transcribe the entire thing for you. And what I love about this is it includes everything that you would want in captions or a transcript. So it includes timestamps. One really impressive thing that it can do is it can identify different speakers. So, it looks like speaker 1, speaker 2 in here. And speaker 1 was me. So I'm actually going to change speaker 1 to Michael. I change all those and apply that. And speaker two was my boss, Amy. We were having one of our sessions called an EdTech chat. And so now my transcripts automatically update. Anytime it hears Amy talk, it'll attribute it to Amy. Anytime it hears me talk, it'll attribute it to me. I can copy and paste, like have it copy and paste the entire text into Word, which I'm already familiar with using. I already know how to use a word processor. Been using them for years and years and years. So this is a really natural interface to edit that transcript, and from not just from a transcript or captioning thing, because now I can take all this text, paste it into YouTube or whatever, and it will automatically take that transcript and apply it to the times when it knows that people are saying those words. But from a documentation and retention standpoint, the document saves the audio file and it saves the full transcript. So I've got everything saved as part of this historical record for things that we create. This is a key part of our workflow now when we create videos. It's just when we publish a video, we also publish the audio, we put it into a document, and then use this to transcribe. And now the transcription is all in one place. This is great for, I hope you'll pardon the phrase, but I internally call it the hit by a bus rule. So if I work on this on my own personal account, and no one else has access to it, and I get hit by a bus, that stuff just vanishes. So being able to use this on collaborative software like Word, where I can just share that file with others and my colleagues have access to it. So if I'm sick or unavailable for some reason, they still have access. No one loses momentum. And usually, pardon me, folks who already have access to Word have access free through work or school. So this is a really cool workflow to incorporate. There's another great app that I really love called Seeing AI from Microsoft. And this is an app that I sometimes use if I'm having trouble coming up with alt text for an image, because it comes up with really basic descriptions of images. It can do a lot more than that, but this is what I use it for. So basically it's iOS only, but you open your Photos app, you take the photo that you want a description of, and you send it to the app almost like you were texting. And this will play out in real time here. But I basically send it to Seeing AI. It does its best to process it, and it guesses that the image is and it basically guessed that it was an image of some folks sitting on a couch with a computer and some kids in the background. So really helpful starting point for coming up with alt text if you're trying to develop those for images. In terms of mainstreaming this concept, Apple just announced 2 days ago, actually 3, some new features for accessibility that they will be rolling out later this year. And one of them is basically a touch talk type of feature where if you are blind or visually impaired, like maybe something like RP or something, it will have like a pointing mode where you point your camera on your phone at something and then you point with your finger and it will tell you what you're pointing at. So it's going to be difficult to see in here, but one thing that I find really fascinating about this microwave experience that it's doing is when the finger is covering a button, the AI can no longer see it, but it already knows what's there. So it knows that the button that they're over is power. So it actually says out loud the word power so that they can hear it. I just muted the audio for this presentation. So this is a mainstream technology at this point, and Apple's tended to be a leader in accessibility. Others have thankfully followed suit when it comes to making their technologies more accessible by default. So we're going to see this on more and more devices as early as this year, and I think probably critical mass within 2 years, which is a pretty incredible thing to have access to, all powered by AI. Let's go ahead and jump ahead here. There's another service that I really love from a company called 11 Labs called Prime Voice AI. And this is like a freemium / subscription service. But if you pay for a higher tier of access, which I think is a whopping $5 a month, you can upload audio of yourself speaking and it will generate an AI voice that is your voice. So if I'm having a day like today where my voice is starting to go a little bit, but I need to record videos for work, or maybe I have some sort of chronic condition like emphysema, as an example, where it's difficult for me to talk for a while without coughing and feeling in distress. I'm an asthmatic. Whenever I have an upper respiratory infection, it always throws off my breathing for a couple of days. Having a service like this where I can put in the text and it would generate the voice for me is a godsend. It's also easier from a course design and development perspective, because if you have a student who comes in, they're like, hey, I'm on the go a lot. It's difficult for me to read some of these things and really sit down. Is there an audio version? You can just toss your text into this service. It'll generate an audio file of your voice reading it. And I know that there's still like a little bit of an uncanny valley situation here where it's like you can kind of tell that it's an AI, but it still sounds a lot like you. To give you an idea of how strong this service is, a Vice media reporter actually used it to break into his own bank account, which had a voice passcode associated with it. So the bank was like, "Oh yeah, it's super secure. You know, you have to use a voice code to unlock your account." And he used this service to break into his own account. So it's compelling enough to do that. And again, when we talk about mainstreaming these technologies, these are not fringe technologies. This is not like, anyone who is in the world of education for over 10 years, you probably remember the whole Web 2.0 movement where there was a new company every day that had no vowels in its name and just all these services that came and went. These general AI applications are here to stay. I think there's a lot of staying power with these, and they are becoming more and more mainstream because that announcement that I mentioned that Apple had about 3 days ago, talking about some of the new accessibility features they're rolling out later this year, included basically the same thing. So for users who are at risk of losing their voice or who can't speak for a while, there's going to be a trainer in there that'll take about 15 minutes to go through. You'll read 150 phrases, and it will generate an AI powered voice that sounds like your voice. So you can give it text, and it will read that text in your voice. They're also rolling out another feature where you can have text read in your voice while you're live on a call. So if you're doing a FaceTime call or something like that, like a video call, instead of having to sign, you could type if you needed to. So I find that to be a really, really fascinating thing. And again, once you roll it out to iOS, it's functionally mainstream. It's on hundreds of millions of devices. So usually what you see is the industry following suit whenever a big company like Apple or Microsoft or Samsung rolls out a big feature that offers a lot of benefit like this. So I think you're going to see this more and more. So I think the real benefit for AI from the course development perspective is it rapidly decreases the amount of time that it takes to do things like course design and development. And your time is a precious resource. I totally get that. Where things come in, though, is AI can help you rapidly develop things like training outlines or course outlines, course content, including like sometimes you just need a placeholder while you're building things out, and it can develop actual competent placeholders instead of the lorem ipsum text. You can use it for the audio narration, like we were just talking about, giving it some text, having it read it in your voice. You can use it for the text transcriptions, like we were talking about with Microsoft Word, where you can rapidly create those. You can even use it to create avatars and graphics if you needed to. So images and just generally higher quality materials where you can get feedback from an AI if you don't always have access to someone to provide you with other feedback. And I will say, like, I'm not over here to say replace everything you do with AI. That's not what I'm saying in any way, shape, or form. AI cannot exist on its own. AI is terrible on its own. AI is excellent when you use it as a tool to augment the work that you're doing, not replace the work that you would do. So I come back to that screwdriver metaphor, because if I'm using a powered electric screwdriver, it's going to be much faster, much more efficient, and much less of a load than using a hand screwdriver. So from that perspective, there are some broader applications of AI that we haven't quite talked about that I want to mention in the last few minutes here. And one that I think is especially clever is a job hiring site called Mentra. So this is an employment network where both employees, like potential employees, like job seekers, and employers can sign up to be matched up with one another. This is for folks who are neurodivergent, so autism, ADHD, epilepsy, things like this, that might impact the accommodations that they would need to be successful at work. So those folks who are highly competent, highly skilled, very eager to go out and work can meet employers who are willing to meet them and create the space that they need to be successful, who recognize their value and worth, and who will make those accommodations so that they can be successful within those working spaces. And essentially, it's using AI to do all of that. It's basically having the employers and the job seekers fill out all this information. That's matching them up based off of the metrics and the analysis of that data. And some of you might be thinking this sounds a lot like online dating, and it is. It's a lot like online dating, but for employers and for employees like job seekers. So it's a great way for folks with neurodivergence to find companies that support that neurodivergence and find value in it and will make accommodations for those folks to be successful at work. Because again, like I mentioned at the beginning, very often someone is not impaired until we put them in an environment that does not accommodate that impairment. That's what makes the impairment an impairment, right? Some other broader applications, if we're coming back to ChatGPT, this sort of reminds me of the spoon theory for chronic illness. If you haven't heard of this, I encourage you to Google it. But the idea is that those living with chronic illness do not necessarily have as much to give each day in terms of common tasks. And not only that, the common tasks that we might do, like shower or prep a meal, are more intensive from an energy perspective for those folks. That's why I look at something like ChatGPT as being a wonderful benefit for folks with chronic illness because it speeds up tasks that historically might be really difficult to do. And that means that you're taking that mental load off of them. You're making those tasks less taxing, which means that they can do more, they can accomplish more in their day so they can work. They can also take care of themselves. They can also feel like they have accomplished more that they know that they're capable of, but that sometimes their body or their mind just won't let them do. So when you have these tools that augment your day-to-day work, that help you do the same jobs in less time, that level of efficiency has benefits that extend well beyond just really practical job applications to, again, if you are living with a chronic illness, making your life easier and less taxing. Even extending to the idea of personas with AI like ChatGPT. And essentially, what you can do is you can take an AI powered tool like that and have it take on the persona of someone else. And one of the best examples I would use is if, especially if you're in the corporate world or if you are on hiring committees, you can tell it to take on the persona of job interview prep. So if you're a manager, you could use this to basically say, you're an employee with neurodivergence. You're applying for this position. Here's the job description. And, what are some of the things that I, as your manager, would need to know? What are some things that I should think about when I'm interviewing you so that I can be a little bit more sensitive to your neurodivergence and understanding how that impacts you and what type of accommodations you might need. So you have these built-in training systems that are really excellent that help make things more accessible overall. So my general hope is that as these AI tools emerge in popularity and as they become more and more mainstream, that you start to use them as ways to significantly decrease the amount of time and effort that has historically taken to make content more accessible. And the nice thing about making content accessible, again, it's probably not a hard sell for folks who self-select to attend this session, is very often it has wide-reaching implications. I know we talk about captions for folks who are blind or visually impaired, or I'm sorry, who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also transcripts for the blind or visually impaired, so a screen reader could read it to them. Those are also incredibly helpful for folks with ADHD, who very often have the comorbidity of an auditory processing disorder, where sometimes the words just don't sound right when they come in to their mind. So having something that they read is really, really helpful alongside the video. So you're getting like this really wide net that you're casting by doing the things that we should be doing anyway. And now it's easier to do because we have these fantastic tools that take things that took so much time before and really decrease the amount of time that takes and makes it more useful for us. So really, really love this stuff. I could talk about it forever, but I will cut myself off because we're ending here in a couple minutes. And I love ending early by a couple minutes so that folks can run to the restroom, grab a snack before your next meeting. In terms of what's next, we do have a free resource course related to our AI resources. That is available on our Academy site. I put the link up on the screen here. It is academy.openlms.net. If you want to chat with OpenLMS, I encourage you to reach out to Ed Walker, who lives in the UK. Great guy. Love interacting with him. He's been on several calls with me, and we spent some time together. So a really cool dude. But if you are interested in the resource course for some of the AI resources, academy.openlms.net, it'll be called The Rise of AI and ChatGPT. You'll purchase it for $0 US, and as part of that purchase process, you'll have an account created so you can be enrolled in the course, and we don't do any marketing through there. So the only updates you get are if I add new course content.
And if anybody wants to check out that course for free, I've just thrown it into the chat in YouTube here as well. So you can just copy paste and throw it into your browser and you're ready to go.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. I know, again, it's probably lunchtime for many of you, and I appreciate you sharing the time.
Michael, thank you so much. This is super, super comprehensive. Absolutely fantastic. Just want to close out our session today with reminding everyone that we do have more resources going forward, not only the Academy course that Michael has been talking about here, but also something here called the AI and Learning Summit. Michael will be speaking at that summit as well. It happens on June 20, 21, and 22. That's when we're launching the summit. And what we're going to be talking about, what are these tools that we're using today to enhance learning, to create efficiencies, to, really, the magic that's making our life better or worse. We'll see what the answer is there. We're also going to be talking about what's coming in the near and not so near future in terms of AI, in terms of learning personalization, in terms of tutoring, in terms of bias detection and those types of things. And then the third track that we're going to have is around a huge piece that Michael was focusing on. What are these challenges that we have in this space that we need to come together as a community to address around ethics, around accessibility, around access, around the digital divide, etc. So it's going to be a fantastic event. We have really, really interesting speakers from Amazon, from teachers in high school, from people who are building these apps today. And so I encourage everybody to join. All of the tickets are free. Just come over to OpenLMS, on our homepage, scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to click there. All you got to do is put your email address in and you'll have you'll get a free ticket to the summit. Thank you again, Michael. Super, super great session. I really appreciate it and wish everybody a good day.